He joins us from Regina. All right, Premier, do you think the NDP is actually in favor of keeping the oil sands buried, or is this just silly political games in election season?
Well, I hope not, but words matter in an election campaign, and if someone that's been touted as a front bencher and I guess potentially a cabinet minister uses words to that effect, there's going to be a need for a clarification. I've heard since that there's support for the principle of getting our oil out of Western Canada, even if it's heavier oil sands oil or Saskatchewan's lighter, sweeter crude, to market. And we need to get to market. We've got one customer for a third of the world's the third largest reserves on Earth in Canada, and we have one customer. We can't get the oil to Tidewater. That means we take, as you know, a discount. We can't sell it at that Brent price, and that, of course, costs taxpayers, the residents of this country who own the resource, hundreds of millions of dollars a year. We can't add as much value to it at home either. So I'm hoping that common sense prevails with all three parties with respect to energy transportation.
What do you think an NDP government would mean for Saskatchewan from an energy policy perspective?
Well, I don't know that yet. We're going to be asking all three parties what their plans are specifically for the area of energy and the environment, this notion of the pricing of carbon. And we know that I think Mr. Trudeau has adopted an approach similar to the federal Conservatives in terms of provincial, the provinces being allowed to meet standards, to meet emissions targets as they see fit, as long as the targets are met. But the federal NDP are talking about a national cap and trade, and so that I don't know the details around it, though, so that has me a bit concerned. We want to give all the leaders the chance to provide a bit of an answer to us. As you know, the Saskatchewan Party is not running any federal candidates in this election, so we'll be looking at things from the perspective of what's good for the province of Saskatchewan. We'll be asking questions about that. We'll be asking questions, I think, around GMOs. We'd like to know clearly from the party leaders whether or not they support this fundamental research that's transformed agriculture in the last while and made Canada a food security superpower again in the world, I think, based on what's happening with pulse crops and some of the other crops we've been able to grow.
I want to talk a little bit because there's stories starting to circulate, and sometimes these things are put into motion a few days before something actually happens. But there's stories are out that the president is getting ready to officially nix Keystone in the next week or so. What's that going to do to Canada-U.S. relations, in your view?
It's not going to be good for Canada-U.S. relations, Don. I don't think this presidency's been very good for the relationship. The current administration, whether it's the Keystone pipeline, as you've noted, the likely denial of that right at the White House, whether it's country of origin labeling, whether it's some of the real irritants, the fees, the increased fees at the border, but Keystone will be a problem again because his own State Department has weighed in twice to say, look, the greenhouse gas emissions from approving this pipeline, the so-called increase is just not there. It's not there, and moreover, the more oil moves by rail car, A, the more dangerous the spills are, and B, the greater the CO2 footprint around transporting all that oil by rail. And so I just don't think the facts are with a denial. It'll be strictly, I think, a political nod to NGOs and who knows, maybe Hollywood or other interest groups that the president wants to support. And I don't think it'll be good for the relationship.
Yeah, the Conservative leader, Stephen Harper, is doing something I haven't seen before. Maybe you have, but I haven't heard him trash-talking premiers, and he certainly seems to be taking shots at the Alberta Premier Rachel Notley and Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne. Is this acceptable behavior even in an election madness campaign, Premier? Well,
I'm not sure I've seen it either. I guess if it's part of some sort of national debate that's relevant, that's germane to the campaign, it's going to happen, and perhaps it has in the past. Again, I agree with you. I don't really remember a situation. I do know that we were brought in as a sort of a collateral. The province of Saskatchewan was brought in for some collateral shots. I think when Ontario was responding to something of late, they noted that they don't get much from Ottawa, but yet they don't get even the minimal support that Saskatchewan and Quebec gets. But we got included into that. I mean, I would just point out that over the last 8 years, Ontario's got $14 billion in equalization. We haven't got any. Obviously, we don't have an auto sector, so we haven't had the support there. I mean, I guess if the Prime Minister and the Premiers are kind of going to go at it, I hope that other innocent provinces aren't dragged into the debate. But some would maybe argue not so innocent.
Yeah, I knew you were going to get equalization in there somehow, but doesn't this taint, though, the relationship? I mean, if the Prime Minister is re-elected how does he sit down with premiers and have a constructive dialogue when he's coming off a campaign where he's using them as punching bags?
Well, I mean, that's a fair point, but I think each province would tell you they've had these kind of disagreements in between writ periods, where the Prime Minister and a provincial premier may not agree on much and may do so, may express that disagreement very publicly. And yet we've had a relationship. We haven't agreed with everything the federal government has done and said so publicly, and yet we've had a good bilateral relationship. It's true this particular Prime Minister doesn't want to have the premiers get together in sort of these traditional meetings, but I think it's fair to say most premiers would say they've never been refused a call or a meeting. We haven't, and have had a good bilateral relationship. And that bilateral relationships have happened notwithstanding some pretty heated debates between premiers and the Prime Minister or federal ministers. So I don't think a campaign precludes the fact that after it's all over, that a constructive bilateral can continue for each of us with the federal government.
All right, we'll see. And meanwhile, what's the matter with your Rough Riders? No, I won't go there. I'm just kidding. I see you're wearing their colors, though. Something to do.
It has something to do with equalization, I'm pretty sure, Don. We're looking into it.
All right, Premier, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Don.
All right.